Yeah, there's a lot more here, Kenan, to get into. So, we've just kind of briefly looked at it, and we don't have time in this class to go, much deeper than where we have gone. But it gives you a general idea and hopefully points you in the right direction so that you can kind of look for these differences. And if you're interested, feel free to study them out further so you can really understand the dominant perspectives or popular perspectives, if you will, in the United States today. Again, if we were going to add in, global worldviews, we would have Islam on here. We would have, many different faiths and their views on things. We would have other, worldviews. Communism or Marxist humanism is still very popular in certain corners of the earth. So that's still a major influence, although it's not a major influence in the United States any longer. We would add a lot more to this list if we were going globally, but these are the major ones here in the United States. Cool. Okay, rock on. All right, so just to kind of sum up here, this is kind of the time period that these began to become fairly powerful in the world, and especially in the United States. Secular humanism kind of got going with the French Enlightenment in many ways, and it's still going fairly strong today, but really gets going with the late 1700s and 1800s. Fundamentalist Christian, we talked about this a little bit on Monday about the reaction, essentially, of kind of fundamentalists sort of circling the wagons and really defining their doctrines and their beliefs and not having a whole lot of range of thought within that because of the fear of what modern secularism might do. And so fundamentalist Christians kind of get going in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Postmodernism, you could argue, gets going even earlier than the 1970s, but really becomes a fairly dominant force in the 1970s, along with thinkers like Rorty and Derrida. And cosmic humanism, kind of the same thing, gets going earlier, like Alan Watts is a popular thinker within cosmic humanism, and he's much earlier than the 1990s, but it becomes very popular and becomes a fairly powerful movement, by the 1990s. So a little bit of chronology. I want to get to this last question here. What is your worldview? What do you think, guys? Do you see, I kind of come from that perspective, or I kind of more line up here, or I see elements of each of these? Feel free to, and feel free to also say, I'm kind of confused about this one. I'm not sure where I land on economics or where I land on philosophy. I'm not sure if I'm a naturalist or a supernaturalist or a non-naturalist, whatever it is, right? So, Aaron, go ahead.
Well, I can see I can fit into each of the categories except cosmic humanism, because I can't see any of that at all in my worldview. I am basically very involved in the extreme Christian fundamentalist crowd, and so I double advocate secular humanism almost all the time. So I mostly religiously agree with the Christian fundamentalists. And in terms of philosophy and politics, I would side with the postmodernists. So I see it in history and stuff, I'm definitely on the secular side. So I have a weird mix, but I just don't understand cosmic humanism.
Interesting. I find that fascinating, Aaron, because I'm willing to bet there's a lot of students in here that probably don't relate well with the postmodernists, but relate more with cosmic humanists. And maybe we can talk about that more here in a second on, what are some of the key differences here. And I find that fascinating that you relate more to the postmodernists as well. I think it's cool. DJ, go ahead.
Okay, so mine is really not in any one of these camps. I was raised Christian fundamentalist, so I have a lot of that, in my brain. Like, the Bible is my core book, and I believe in supernaturalism. But other than those two things, I'm in everyone but secular humanism. I really understand secular humanism, and I generally debate on the side of secular humanism, just because devil's advocate. But I'm definitely kind of postmodernism in my economics and politics, and a little cosmic humanist in terms of history, which might sound a little weird. Evolutionary godhood, like you said, that was the kind of kooky sounding one, but it makes the most sense to me out of all of them.
Interesting. Cool. Thanks for sharing, DJ. obviously DJ and Aaron are very different from each other in their thinking, which is fascinating, but they have some overlap as well. Another question, because in light of Tannen's comment in the chat, because I can feel you, Tannen, it's hard to figure it out, right? Is it worth figuring this out? Do you remember at the beginning of this class, way at the beginning of the semester, we looked at this chart? I don't have a slide for it, but I'll just create it real quick. Remember this chart of like how to define or how to discover truth, right? That there is this, you have like logic / reason, right? You've got intuition. And intuition can be anything from prayer to kind of, you know, your gut in a way, you know. So all of that kind of falls into that camp. What you feel is going to be the best thing, where your intuition takes you. You've got authority or experts, right? Like if you have a question about biology, it might be smart to go to a biologist, right? And then you have, what am I missing? Oh, physical evidence or empiricism. And all of these are tools in which people use to discover truth. And so, Tannen, I feel you, because it's like, okay, I think I kind of go this way, or I think I kind of go that way, but, you know, for a lot of you, you might be saying, I haven't really put it to the test yet. I haven't really ran those types of concepts, you know, through my own personal logic and appealed to authorities and appealed to my own intuition and really sought evidence on it. You know what I mean? And it takes a lifetime, frankly, to really do that thoroughly. So a lot of us are just figuring it out. A lot of us are kind of getting into, I think I'm coming from this perspective, but it's easy to, or just know that you don't need to have it all figured out right now, A. B, you will likely, if you're anything like most people that I know, you'll likely change over time. You know? You will likely change and evolve over time as you grow and as you have different experiences and so forth. Some people tend to become more religious over time and more believers in supernaturalism, and others tend to move away from that, you know. And that's just, you know, one example of literally many, many ways that we can change and evolve. So,
frankly, I'm a combination of all these, primarily, yeah, perhaps a combination of all these. Perhaps Christian fundamentalism, maybe the least. I don't know. I mean, like, as far as core books, you know, well, I'm gonna disregard that feature because, I mean, yeah, they're probably all decent books. I haven't personally read all these books, so I can't speak for that. But then philosophy-wise, I mean, you know, there's probably some things I'm willing to bet that are, you know, science can't really explain. But then I'm also kind of a fan of the anti-realist movement that there's no such thing as objectivity, but I don't know. I consider myself more relativist, but also, well, probably more of a cultural relativist, honestly, but, you know, think that it's important to have some degree of morals or standards, otherwise everything can just kind of fall apart because, frankly, people are inherently selfish, and unless we had some safeguards in place, less government does not equal more freedom necessarily. But, yeah.
Interesting.
And then, yeah, and then as far as politics, I don't know. Combination of all that, I lean largely in the middle.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Shannon, what do you think?
I'm not really sure where I land because I kind of like, so like how we were talking earlier though about how these ideals like don't necessarily always work how they're supposed to, like capitalism maybe. The idea of it is great, but it never really works that way. So I don't really know where I fall on that scale because I'm trying to figure out what would really work like in reality.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Shannon. And you'll figure it out over time, and you'll also have more questions over time, and that's okay. So I hope no one here feels like, oh, I've got to figure this out, and I've got to. It's okay not to know. In fact, I think it's really healthy to say, I'm not sure. I think I'm here, might be there, and keep going. But what's important and what I'm trying to get at today is to make you aware of it. And because by being aware of it, you can begin to figure it out and you can begin to consider. Cool. Let's go to Daria and then Brendan.
All right. So I don't really understand, like, why I I should care where I fall. Like, as long as I can see that I fall, like, as long as I can see all sides of the spectrum, why does it matter that I am certain, like, that I define it? Like, I don't understand why that part's important. Like, I can see myself all over, so why does it matter that I have to know, like, exactly where I am?
Well, no, it doesn't. You don't have to fall within any of these camps. You don't have to perfectly define it, and it's okay to be situational or to consider all sides. Daria, I think that's healthy, and I think that's awesome. But what I do think is important, and tell me what you think of this, Daria, is that being aware of it is useful. Not that you have to decide or even, side with one of these groups, but that being aware of them and being aware of your own thoughts. Did you notice as we talked about these, I tend to think that way, or I might think that way, or sometimes I think that way. Even being aware of it helps you to kind of understand it that much more and therefore understand others more and so forth. Does that make sense, Daria? What do you think?
It makes sense. I just think you should, like, restate the question in a way that's, like, maybe not, I don't know, maybe I interpreted it wrong, but it felt like you were saying, like, you have to define yourself, which you weren't, but that's what I interpreted it as.
Yeah, and you don't. You're exactly right. You really don't, and I'm right there with you, Daria. I definitely don't agree with one of these only, for sure. Yeah. So thanks for that. Seriously, I think it's a cool thing to discuss and think about and to consider for yourself. And wherever you fall, and you might change over time, Daria, I think that's great. But being aware of that is probably the important thing. Brendan, go ahead.
I don't think I actually fall into one category when it comes to this. I mean, right now in myself, I can see some Christian fundamentalism when it comes to, like, my philosophy and all that. But definitely not, like, history and, creation being 6,000 years ago and all that stuff. I don't really believe that. But yeah, I just kind of, like, I can see little, like, bits of my ideals and my personality kind of falling into these different into all of these different categories. So yeah, that's probably where I would stand with this.
Cool. Good to hear it. Fascinating discussion. I'm glad you guys are becoming aware of these things. If you find this interesting, please feel free to go further and deeper into it. Many of you are already doing that. Many of you might find some of these things like, I've never even heard of that before, and want to discover it a little bit more or parcel it out, whatever you want to do. But I just find it fun for you guys to be able to have this experience and discuss where you're coming from. It's really cool to see it. So thanks so much, guys, for being here and being a part of this class. Oh, last question that I was going to ask you is, what is your epistemology? Remember, on Monday we talked a little bit about epistemology, which is your system for determining truth. In other words, your system for determining what do you think about these and or others, right? So also defining that is super useful. And maybe, Daria, that's a more important question to ask and answer, is not so much which one do you maybe agree with or don't agree with or why, but what is your system for figuring that out in the first place?